Hey everybody, this is Michael from Systems of Human Performance. Today I'm doing a read-along of a recent article titled "The Age of Analysis is Over." Before we jump into that, I just want to say a sincere thank you to everyone who has been liking and sharing and subscribing to Systems of Human Performance. I've recently seen a rather large uptick in the number of shares and the number of subscribers, even getting some paid subscribers. And I would just like to encourage you with my own appreciation and thanks that it does go noticed, and I'm very appreciative of that. I ask everyone in these podcasts to share this with just one friend who you think would enjoy this conversation. And I ask you again to do that. It makes a huge difference, and I really appreciate it. With that out of the way, we'll go ahead and get started. The age of analysis is over. This article is essentially looking at kind of dichotomy between some analytical methods that we find in organizations, namely kind of doing traditional analysis like dissection, root cause analysis, descriptives, and comparing that to the possibilities of being more experimental, of yes, having a cost associated with doing experiments, but gaining so much more than what traditional descriptives analysis and root cause analysis can really ever promise us. For more than a century, management has been defined by analysis. Faced with an important decision, our 20th century instinct has been to gather more data, perform additional analysis, construct more sophisticated models, and deliberate just a little longer. Powered by greater sophistication in organization and the advent of the computer, we have become remarkably adept at decomposing problems into their constituent parts, optimizing processes and forecasting outcomes with increasing precision. Give my regards to analysis. This analytical tradition has served organizations extraordinarily well. It enabled the rise of industrial engineering, operations research, statistical quality control, financial modeling, and countless other disciplines that transformed modern management. But now there's a growing realization that many of the problems organizations now face cannot be solved by the same analytical methods of yesteryear. Attempts have been made to bolster traditional analysis through new and sophisticated algorithms, big data, and the like, but many organizations are seeing that they are still running up against an analytical ceiling. Analysis has not become less valuable per se, but the organizational systems we seek to understand have become far more complex. Indeed, incorporating analytical outposts of big data actually increases the organizational complexity. We are entering an era in which observation is becoming just as important as analysis, and experimentation is emerging as one of the primary ways organizations acquire knowledge. Okay, so if I unpack that just a little bit, our last sentence is essentially the thesis of this essay, which is that experimentation is going to be the future, and reliance on acquisition of data and analysis of data is going to be one of yesteryear. What we also see, if you kind of think about the 20th century mode of using data for the first time, we of course are finding efficiencies in the data. Essentially, low-hanging fruit are what we're able to identify and then address. And many of these disciplines that we look at, like industrial engineering, financial modeling, statistical quality control, they're actually focused on efficiencies. They're focused on creating a more optimized organization, which kind of shows you the paradigm of analysis. It's very focused on efficiency per se. And what we're going to see with an experimentation is, yes, we have opportunities to optimize, but there's other greater opportunities to do many other things, namely to learn about your organization and learn about your industry in a way that you never could with simple data analysis. So, as always, please subscribe, please share with one friend. Analysis remains indispensable. Engineers should continue to measure and calculate. Accountants are still going to count beans. operations researchers should continue to optimize. Managers should continue to collect evidence before making decisions. But we are mistaken if we believe that by simply analyzing data long enough, reality will eventually surrender all of its secrets. Analysis basically tells us the descriptives of the system, what has happened in the past. We often build models of these descriptives, which we hope will predict the future. This is essentially any kind of analysis we do. Root cause analysis, we're looking at the root cause of something that has happened, or we're trying to predict a future cause by breaking apart the descriptives of its constituent parts. And essentially, we're trying to acquire data to have a better model of the world. We often build models of these descriptives, which we hope will predict the future, but every analysis is ultimately built upon assumptions and abstraction. It simplifies reality so that it can be understood. The more complex the system becomes, the greater the distance between the model and the world it seeks to describe. The conceptual organization. We should think of the organization as existing in two distinct forms. The first is the conceptual organization that lives in strategic plans, process maps, organizational charts, customer personas, value stream maps, financial projections, and the minds of its leaders. The second is the organization that actually exists, the platonic solid of the organization, if you will. It consists of personnel, technologies, customers, and the true behavior of all of these as they interact with one another. Good management depends on reducing the distance between these organizations. Yet many organizations gradually begin to construct walls around the citadel of the first organization, that is the conceptual organization, the ivory tower of the ostensibly unreal conceptual organization. They mistake the map for the territory. So here what I'm trying to describe is that the world of management is based on spreadsheets. It's based on strategic plans. It's based on essentially intellectual capital. But that intellectual capital does not actually exist, and its value only exists in its relation to the reality of the world. So if we continue to use more sophisticated models, if we continue to try to add more variables to models that are inherently limited, what we're going to do is we're actually going to, at the very best, we're going to maintain the gap that we have. But as the world gets more complex, as businesses get larger and more complicated in scale, my proposition as well is that this complexity is actually going to drive a wedge between what we can actually see or plan or strategically think about and how we actually relate to the reality. We can actually see this transition a little bit in how organizations work. If we think about like mid 20th century organizations, think about like the Pentagon, right? Very, very structured, lots of protocols, very centralized. Many of the organizations in the government coming out of the 20th century are centralized, right? The centralized intelligence agency, right? The CIA. The Pentagon is a great symbol of this, of just very centralized power. We're going to have all of our analysts in one area, and then we're going to distribute the decisions out to the rest of the organization, whether that's the military, whether that's the bureaucracy, whatever it may be. What we've seen now in the last 30 years or so is a revolution in that, where we're actually trying to not have that command and control structure, but we're trying to distribute the decision-making authority to many different people. And indeed, many startups succeed in that way. So there we can see that the conceptual organization, we've already seen in the past 50, 70 years, a recognition of its limitations and some ways to remedy that limitation. I think experimentation, as the thesis of this essay is going to show, is another great way to remedy that inherent limitation. This distinction becomes increasingly important because organizations are not merely technical systems. They are socio-technical systems composed of people, technologies, incentives, cultures, regulations, suppliers, customers, and thousands of interactions that unfold simultaneously. No map, no matter how elegant, will be able to capture all of this. As changes happen throughout the business and in industry, it creates ripple effects throughout this complicated ecosystem. Each ripple propagates throughout the larger system, producing consequences that are often impossible to predict completely beforehand. They are simply the characteristics of complex systems. And this, dear friends, is the best case for learning systems thinking. Nevertheless, even armed with systems thinking, there are too many interactions, too many feedback loops, and too many adaptive behaviors for conceptual model to fully anticipate. Most organizations make sincere efforts to understand the problems they face. They gather evidence, consult experts, benchmark competitors, and perform careful analyses. We should continue doing all of these things. Good judgment should always precede action, but eventually we arrive at the limits of what reasoning alone can tell us. Beyond that point, there is only one teacher left, and that teacher is reality itself. So, again, here I'm trying to show that the conceptual organization is not inherently bad, it's just inherently limited. And once we attain that limit, as I'm suggesting we are approaching, we need to pivot. We need to have another tool in our arsenal. We need to be able to relate to reality in a better way than spreadsheets and models. Experiment, experiment, experiment. Experimentation is the bridge between our conceptual understanding of a system and the system as it actually exists. It is the mechanism through which assumptions encounter reality. It tests reality against assumptions which are tried. The answer to our assumptions is supplied not by an authority, intuition, or theoretical elegance, but by observation. The system responds, and if we're paying attention, it teaches us something we did not know before. The full value of experimentation is often missed. Most teams who do use experimentation, most do not, by the way, will use it merely as a mechanism for improvement. They start with a problem and interrogate reality with experiments until it yields a satisfactory resolution. Their task then becomes standardizing the improvement, disseminating it, and maintaining this improvement. In fact, this is where virtually all problem-solving methods stop. Whether it's lean or human-centered design or Six Sigma or Red X or anything else, these all focus on direct outcomes that are learned through the experiments themselves. And indeed, I'll say, as one who practices the lean and the Six Sigma and the human-centered design, this is definitely where a lot of projects are scoped and where they stop. It's we're going to try to improve, but we're not going to try to have an organizational capability learn anything through these experiments. And I think that's exactly the wrong way to do this. What I would submit to you is that this should not be the primary purpose of experimentation. So not only should we do something else, but this something else should actually be the focus of experimentation, and the improvement is actually secondary. It's a bit of a paradigm twist, but I hope you'll follow along and see where I'm going with this. Experimentation allows us to probe a deeper understanding of our organization and its systems. Experimentation is an engine of organizational learning, and to miss this is to miss its greatest value. So certainly this is a bit idealistic, but I think it's absolutely true that if we had an organization that was committed to learning about itself, learning about its industry, learning about its customers, and learning about the dynamics and the feedback loops that exist in those, and doing this through experimentation, that company is going to be in a far better position than its competitors, than anyone else in the industry, very, very quickly, because it's going to have self-knowledge. It's going to have knowledge of the customer as it relates to themselves. It's going to have knowledge of the industry as it relates to itself. And as we'll see as well, this is something that nobody can steal from you. Nobody can replicate this. Nobody can purchase that same report and get the same insights out of it. Over time, the thoughtful cataloging and review of experimentation builds a tome of knowledge about the organization or industry or customers. This knowledge is indispensable. It cannot be purchased or copied. It creates an institutional understanding of how the reality actually functions. This growing body of knowledge becomes one of the organization's most valuable assets and can ultimately be leveraged to attain a strategic advantage. And the strategic advantage that I'm thinking of can be barriers to entry. It can be capturing the customers through switching costs. Those are the two that I'm thinking of most importantly. Competitors can imitate products, purchase similar technologies, and recruit talented employees. They cannot easily replicate bespoke empirical knowledge. Enter systems thinking. This perspective should sound familiar to anyone who has studied systems thinking or human-centered design. Systems thinking teaches us that the behavior of a system emerges from the interaction among its components rather than from the components themselves, which traditionally is the subject of analysis. As I'm going to look at the components, Six Sigma, some highfalutin statistics might also look at the first level interactions, but mostly we're looking at the main, what we would call the main effects of variables. Those interactions cannot always be deduced analytically because they often reveal themselves only after the system begins responding to change. Human-centered design reaches a remarkably similar conclusion. Designers are repeatedly reminded that they are not their users. No amount of empathy, interviews, or careful reasoning completely substitutes for placing an idea into the hands of real people and observing, what we might call ethnography, what happens. In both disciplines, observation ultimately becomes the source of understanding. This is exceptionally important. When we think of problem-solving techniques, a lot is focused on the mathematics. It's focused on the logic. It's focused on the engineering acumen. And this is simply not the case. There's not, engineers are not that smart. I'm one of them. I know. We're not smart enough to know what reality is going to do. It's far, far, far higher leveraged to go out and see what reality does. Go and see is one of the main ideas of Lean and the Toyota production system, is we're not going to know what happens on paper. We must observe, and then we take that reality not as we would want it, not as we would hope for, but as it actually is. Optimization through experimentation. So we focused a little bit on learning, building that organizational acumen, trying to parse out how this organizational acumen can lead to strategic advantage. Now let's go back and look at optimization, which is typically the domain of analytical efforts, root cause analysis, descriptive statistics. We're going to look at experimentation and see if there's not a way that experimentation can also help optimization. One of the clearest examples of this principle comes from modern software companies. Every day, organizations conduct thousands of A and B tests on websites, applications, and digital products. A blue button is compared with a green one. One headline emphasizes convenience, while another one emphasizes trust. A registration form requests 3 pieces of information instead of 5. These changes are often so small that they appear trivial in isolation. Yet each experiment reveals something about customer behavior. Customers vote not with opinions collected in surveys, but with their actions. This is very, very important. This is human-centered design through and through. This is ethnography. I'm trying to see not their stated preference, but their revealed preference in how they actually behave. The superior design becomes the new baseline, and another experiment begins. In a matter of days, these successive experiments produce extraordinary improvements. The knowledge is then codified into style guides for designers, and all successive deployments are already optimized to the highest levels. Optimization emerges from hundreds of small conversations with reality. The same principle extends well beyond software, with only slight variations to the A/B testing frame. And this is a true story, happened this week as I'm recording this. I was recently working with a national insurance company with hundreds of branch offices spread throughout the country. The company wished to introduce a new marketing slogan to drive in traffic. And I'll exclude the slogan so you don't know which company I'm talking about. The conventional approach, which was already half deployed by the time I came into the project, involved the marketing team, creatives, some focus groups, and a few executives arguing over which slogan was to be used. Months into the project and severely behind schedule, I recommended another approach. Develop 10 candidate slogans. Place each slogan on promotional posters outside 10 different branches for 2 weeks while carefully measuring walk-in traffic, and namely the increase in walk-in traffic from your baseline. At the conclusion of the experiment, compare the results. One slogan consistently produces the largest increase in customer visits. The organization adopts that slogan nationally. So that's the idea, is we can, rather than deliberate in kind of this conceptual organization about which slogan is better and what slogan, based on our consumer research, is going to interact and going to inspire our customers to come into the branches, we can take a step out of the conceptual organization and move into reality and put this in front of actual customers and observe. This is the experimentation part. Observe their behaviors and then codify what we should do based on the consumer behaviors. Extremely high powered. You don't need sophisticated statistics. You don't need sophisticated design of experiments to play this out. The experiment is inexpensive. The temporary slogans quickly disappeared and were forgotten with no impact to brand image. The company improved sales nationally by adopting a slogan that had already proven itself. Such a minimal investment compared to a definite boost to the top and bottom lines, right? So now that we've validated that this slogan is actually going to do what we want it to do, which is increase top line growth, yeah, the marginal cost of buying a couple extra posters, a couple extra signs, and posting them around a couple branches really makes no impact. Doesn't make an impact to your brand, doesn't make an impact to your bottom line. Certainly not if the top line's rising as well. They could do it again in different fonts and colors and placements, right? I'm going to use blue font. I'm going to use red font. I'm going to place it in on a main road. I'm going to place it on a billboard, and they could look at the benefits in different markets. Each time they would either boost sales or learn that it doesn't matter. So there's a minimal downside. It's a captured loss in what is actually going to be invested. We know that it's not going to have a huge impact on our brand. And we can either learn that it doesn't matter, in which case we can go for the cheaper option, or it does matter, and this is why we need to spend on billboards or use blue font instead of red font, whatever it is. The valuable outcome of this experiment was not identifying the best slogan. Isn't that something? So we're optimizing, we're getting revenue because of the best slogan, but the experiment reveals something about the customer, right? So now we're learning not just about which slogan to use, but what about our customer resonates with that slogan. The slogan, which wins, emphasizes trust rather than savings. That's an insight about the customer, not just the slogan. As a business, we can take that knowledge and codify it into all of our marketing plans for the future. The experiment generated both improvements and understanding. Experimentation as positive symmetry. This also illustrates an important principle that Nick Taleb has written about extensively, notably in his book Anti-Fragile. Not all opportunities possess symmetrical risk. The chart below represents an opportunity that has positive symmetry, where the downside is small, limited, and finite, while the upside remains potentially enormous. This is what we see in A/B testing. This is what we see a lot in experimentation. And thoughtful experimentation, as I say, often falls into this category. The cost of testing 10 slogans across a small sample of branches is trivial and falls into a matter of hours for personnel and a few material costs for banners. It's costing us very little. If none perform any better than the existing slogan, very little has been lost and the organization has still acquired knowledge. But if one consistently increases customer traffic, that small experiment can generate millions of dollars in additional revenue over its lifetime. The asymmetry is striking. A modest investment purchases the possibility of a disproportionately large return. As Taleb urges, we should actively search for these positive asymmetric opportunities because they offer one of the highest returns on managerial effort. They allow us to repeatedly expose itself to large gains while keeping the inevitable failures inexpensive and contained. Experimentation often presents this sort of opportunity. So here is a chart. I can't remember. I read Anti-Fragile last year, I believe. I think he has a chart similar to this. But this is the general idea, is that we're doing an investment. there is most definitely a possibility for loss. But we see that the likelihood of loss is less likely than any gain, and that we could even have extraordinarily high gains. Even if the likelihood of that is very small, we're still going to try it because, 1 out of every 100 times we're going to get it right. This is what venture capitalists do, is they go out and they try to invest in unicorns, right? They know that they're going to lose on many of their ventures, but how many companies do you have to have in your portfolio that you scale to, $10 billion do you really need before you can retire, right? So that's what venture capital is doing. It's that same mindset. And we can take that mindset. We can have a little bit of risk knowing that we're playing the odds. And eventually, if we play enough of them, we're going to win. That's how casinos work. They know that if enough people come in here and play the roulette wheel, it's going to end on 00. It's going to end on 0, right? And those odds, ever so slightly in my favor, is what's going to make my casino all of that money. We're taking that same principle of winning in the long term, and we're applying it to experimentation for organizations. Now we're going to look at different types of experiments. It's useful to recognize that not all experiments pursue the same objective. Some experiments are exploratory. Low-resolution prototypes fall into this category. We see those in human-centered design, of course. A paper sketch of a software interface, a cardboard mock-up of a workstation, sometimes we call that wireframing, or a simple role-playing exercise allows an organization to explore possibilities before making significant investments. The purpose is not refinement, but discovery. These rough prototypes expose problems while they remain inexpensive to correct. Other experiments function as proofs of concept. Here, the objective is establishing feasibility. Can the technology perform as intended? Can the manufacturing process consistently achieve the desired quality? Can the service actually be delivered? Before investing heavily, organizations reduce uncertainty by demonstrating that the underlying concept works under real conditions. Finally, as we just kind of saw, there are optimization experiments. The concept already works. The challenge is improving it. Small changes are introduced, measured, retained when successful, and discarded when they fail. Continuous improvement is nothing more than a disciplined sequence of optimization experiments carried out over many years. While each individual improvement may appear insignificant, their cumulative effect can transform an organization. Recognizing these distinctions changes the way organizations think about experimentation. I am forthcoming on a framework to prescribe how organizations should use these different types of experimentation in a codified way. So more on that if you're interested. A prototype should not be criticized because it lacks polish. A proof of concept should not be judged by the standards of a production system. And an optimization experiment should not be expected to reinvent the organization. Each exists to answer a different question. Collectively, they allow organizations to move from uncertainty towards understanding. Cultural impact of experimentation. And this is the final section. Perhaps the greatest benefit of experimentation is not technical, but cultural. Organizations that depend exclusively upon analysis often become organizations that fear uncertainty. Sometimes we call that analysis paralysis. There is much now being said about psychological safety. Suffice it to say that a culture where every proposal must be justified before it is attempted, or every initiative waits for certainty that can never truly arrive, that culture has not cultivated a psychologically safe culture. Eventually, curiosity gives way to caution. Organizations become exceptionally good at discussing change while becoming increasingly reluctant to experience it. Organizations that embrace experimentation develop a different relationship with uncertainty. They recognize that uncertainty is not always something to eliminate before acting. Often, it is simply the natural consequences of operating within complex systems. The appropriate response is not endless deliberation, but disciplined inquiry. Carefully designed experiments reduce uncertainty, one observation at a time, while steadily expanding the organization's understanding of itself. None of this diminishes the importance of theory. Experience without theory is little more than random activity. This is, by the way, right out of the Deming ideas of what he calls systems of profound knowledge. Theory tells us what questions to ask, what variables to observe, and what hypotheses deserve investigation. But theory alone remains incomplete. It proposes, but experiment disposes. One develops explanations. The other determines whether those explanations survive contact with reality. Again, we're melding together the conceptual with the actual, the conceptual organization with reality. Learning emerges from the conversation between the two. The age of analysis is not ending because analysis has failed us. It is ending because the problems confronting modern organizations increasingly exceed what analysis alone can resolve. As complexity grows, observation becomes indispensable. The organizations that thrive over the coming decades will not simply be those with the largest analytics departments of the most sophisticated forecasting models. Again, my thought is that is going to be table stakes very quickly, and that many organizations are not going to be able to differentiate themselves based on that alone. They will be organizations that have learned how to interact intelligently with reality through experimentation. They will analyze carefully, experiment continuously, and learn relentlessly. Their greatest competitive advantage will not be that they know how more than everyone else. It will be that they have built systems capable of learning faster than everyone else. So that's the end of the article. It was free, so please do me a favor. Subscribe if you haven't. Leave a comment, helps other people find this article, and share Systems of Human Performance, this publication, this article, with just one person who you think might enjoy it. As always, if you'd like to be a paying financial supporter, I would really appreciate it. If you don't want to join a subscription, I will say here, I have a book coming out. It's called Man and Machine, and it looks at human-centered design, and it looks at how humans interact with systems and how we can design systems to become more efficient, more productive, and more humane. So if that's something that interests you, please reach out to me by message and we can talk about it. I have an ebook that is available for pre-order, and the paperback version will be coming out next month in August. So with that, thank you for your time, thank you for listening, and thank you for being a part of the Systems of Human Performance ecosystem.